I took forward-facing sonar off my boat for 30 days, and the results were actually kind of shocking. In this video, I want to show you the impact this had on my offshore bass fishing, from the number of fish I caught, to the size, the baits I had to throw, and the strategies I had to employ when I didn't have forward-facing sonar on the boat. Let's get into it. First, let's lay out the ground rules for this experiment. I was able to get out and fish 4 times this past month without forward-facing sonar. I spent 8 hours in the water each day and only fished offshore. The month before this, I fished 4 times with forward-facing sonar. So we have a pretty good sample size of forward-facing versus non-forward-facing trips. It's not a massive sample size, it's not like statistically accurate, but it was enough to get some really interesting insights on the impact this had on my fishing. Let's start by looking at some of the data that I gathered during these fishing trips, and then we'll get into the insights. Let's start with the number of fish I caught on these trips. During the 4 trips I took with forward-facing sonar, I caught 71 bass that were less than 3 pounds, 10 bass that weighed 3 pounds, and 4 bass that weighed 4 or more pounds. On my 4 trips without forward-facing sonar, just using traditional side scan, down scan, and 2D sonar, I caught 15 fish that were less than 3 pounds, 6 fish that were 3 pounds, and 8 fish that were 4 pounds or bigger. Interestingly, I caught more 4+ pound bass without forward-facing sonar, though I caught a lot more smaller fish when I was using it. If we average out the number of fish I caught across these 4 fishing trips in each group, you can see I caught 21 fish on average with forward-facing sonar and only 7 without. Interestingly though, the average weight of the fish that I caught with forward-facing sonar was only 1.8 pounds, but without it, it was over 2.5 pounds, so a better average quality of fish. Finally, I found my average 5 bass limit for the best 5 bass that I caught on each fishing trip. And on average, with forward-facing sonar, I was catching a 13.5 pound limit, but without, I was catching a 15 pound average limit. And this was really fascinating to me because even though I was catching fewer fish without forward-facing sonar, I was catching, on average, a better quality of fish. And I have a couple of theories why this was the case. And the first came down to how I was actually approaching my fishing days. Whenever I'm fishing without forward-facing sonar, I'm basically using my old school bass fishing techniques that I have spent the past 15 to 20 years developing. I used to fish a lot of fishing tournaments when I was younger, and so all of the techniques I develop are with the goal of catching the 5 biggest bass I possibly can. Without being able to see the fish with my forward-facing sonar out in front of me, I have to rely exclusively on my side imaging, down imaging, and 2D sonar, and I have to basically follow my instincts on whether the fish down there are good enough quality to even throw at. This means that on my trips when I didn't have forward-facing sonar, I was basically only focusing on strategies and techniques that I know can catch better than average fish, and I wasn't getting distracted by seeing so many fish on the screen. Something I feel like I do a lot when I have forward-facing sonar on the boat is cast at every single dot or fish I see. And this results in a lot more fish catches. As you can see, obviously, I have 3 times the number of fish catches with forward-facing sonar. But I feel like I'm spending a lot of time fishing for these smaller fish when I really maybe shouldn't be if I'm trying to just reach the goal of my 5 biggest fish. And therefore, I'm probably spending more of my fishing day actually targeting big fish without forward-facing sonar versus with it. Now, this doesn't mean I couldn't just focus exclusively on big fish if I had forward-facing sonar on the boat. I just don't have as much experience optimizing my fishing day for big fish using forward-facing sonar. From this experiment, honestly, what I think I need to be doing is throwing at fewer fish I see on my screen and really focusing on using forward-facing sonar, if I'm going to use it, to target better quality fish and learning the baits and techniques and strategies that will actually help me catch those bigger fish, rather than just getting out there, dropping the trolling motor on the spot and throwing at every single thing I see. Now, obviously, if you want to just go catch a ton of fish, the forward-facing sonar approach is definitely the way to go. But if you're a tournament angler, you can definitely optimize your strategies without forward-facing sonar, as you can see, but you can also optimize it with it. And I feel like if I was better at using forward-facing sonar and had spent more time over the past few years really dialing it in, I probably would catch the same average quality of fish, if not bigger, if I basically ignored all those small fish and only focus on those better quality fish. And this is definitely something that I probably should be working on if I want to implement forward-facing sonar into my strategies for catching the biggest 5 fish possible. One thing I heard on a recent Bass Talk Live podcast with Justin Lucas is his comments saying that the top anglers in the world now are basically focusing 100% of their time on forward-facing sonar and optimizing to catch as many or as big a fish possible with that technology. And it's such a wide-reaching technology in the sense you can use it in all different situations, lake types, things like that, that it makes it viable to focus on it exclusively and basically dominate on both trails year-round, really optimizing for either the number of fish or the size of fish you're catching, but only using that forward-facing sonar. I don't know if that's what I want to do for my fishing personally, and I actually had a lot of fun fishing without the forward-facing sonar this past month. I actually felt a little bit more of a sense of accomplishment personally, finding those fish, trying to catch them, but it was definitely way more of a grind. One thing I definitely learned from this experience is that I have to spend a lot more time behind the steering wheel graphing with my standard down imaging, side imaging, 2D sonar unit to find these offshore fish. What I basically found is that on average, I'll graph for maybe 2.5 hours on my forward-facing fishing trips, and then I'll spend the rest of the time with the trolling motor down looking at fish with the forward-facing. On my days without forward-facing though, I was spending 4 to 5 hours of my 8-hour fishing day graphing and driving around looking for schools of fish. With forward-facing sonar, one thing you can do is basically target individual fish or small wolf packs of 3 to 5 bass that are roaming on offshore areas. You can even find them up on bait balls or just kind of randomly suspended out in the middle. But one thing about that is you can't catch the majority of those fish without the forward-facing sonar because they're pelagic or they move around the lake. If I tried to graph them with my down imaging or side imaging and then tried to stop, put the trolling motor down and fire at them, by the time I cast on the waypoint I made, those fish are long gone. As a result, I had to find groups of fish that were setting up on a particular object, target, or structure spot. In one instance, I found fish setting on a really nice rock pile that was in 4 to 8 feet of water. In another case, I found a nice rocky point that had a drop-off that had fish stacked up on it. I found another rock pile in a Beaver Lake trip that was loaded up with some fish. Honestly, a lot of the places I found fish were around rock piles. And then one of my trips, I found fish around offshore brush piles. In all of these cases, there was a very specific object that these fish were setting around, and I was able to pick apart that specific object with baits like a jig and a crankbait to get those fish to bite. Another interesting finding from this experiment is that during my non-forward-facing sonar trips, I caught all of my fish on each trip within a 1-hour window. I would end up graphing for 4 to 5 hours until I finally found an active group of fish, and then I would catch every single fish I caught within that 1-hour window. On the flip side, when I was fishing with forward-facing sonar, I was able to catch fish more consistently throughout the day, though there were peak feeding windows where I caught a lot of fish. This is because I could target inactive or suspended fish on offshore areas and target them with forward-facing sonar and almost coax them into biting by working the bait right in front of their face. I obviously can't do this without forward-facing sonar, and so I think this is one of the main reasons I caught more fish on my forward-facing sonar trips compared to non-forward-facing sonar trips. I was still able to catch fish in both situations, but it took a lot more graphing and patience, and I had to go in my fishing day mentally prepared that I was only going to catch fish for about an hour out of my day and spend the other 7 hours looking for those fish that I would eventually end up catching. Really quick guys, I want to let you know that I'm going to be posting extra content on the Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube channel every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday going forward. It's a channel we started a few years ago, and we haven't been posting there very much, but I want to use that channel to give you a little bit more insight into some of the basics of different techniques, some of the equipment I use, some of the basic strategies and concepts of bass fishing that I think are very important to share, and also just give you some kind of daily or weekly commentary on what I'm learning in fishing, and hopefully it's a new place for you to get some additional fishing information. So if you haven't subscribed to the Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube channel already, definitely head over there using the link in the description or just typing into YouTube Bass Fishing Declassified. I really appreciate it if you subscribed and checked out some of the new videos. And that kind of leads us into the baits that I've been throwing. If we take a look at a graph I actually made several years ago, which I called the Big Bass Index. It's kind of a overly complicated analysis I did a few years ago, taking into account my usage of certain fishing lures versus the size of fish I was catching. And if you want to see the full video and you're really into bass fishing nerdy stuff, definitely go check that video out. I'll link it in the description. But basically my findings over a 7-year sample set, or 5 to 7 year sample set, is that I caught the majority of my big fish on a football jig, a deep diving crankbait, and a big worm. Those are my big fish baits offshore. If we take a look at the baits I caught my fish on in my non-forward facing sonar trips, I basically caught them on a football jig, a big Magnum square bill, and a big 10XD oversized crankbait. That's what I caught for the majority of my fish. I also caught some on a 10-inch worm in one of the trips. So all of my top baits from that Big Bass Index analysis basically got the job done when I didn't have forward facing. And those are the baits I've spent years perfecting and really learning how to throw, learning the situations they work in. And to find those situations, I spent a ton of time behind my graph specifically looking for spots that were holding fish where I could catch them on, again, a jig, a crankbait, and a big worm. However, if we take a look at my forward-facing fishing trips and actually go back as far as 2 years, we can see my top baits when I have forward-facing sonar on the boat. As far as catching 3-pound bass, you can see that the Damiki rig and the hair jig are tied for my #1 baits, followed by the core tackle tush with the spunk shad and the jerk bait. Interestingly, if we focus on 4+ pound bass, the jerk bait becomes my #1 bait with forward-facing sonar, followed by that core tackle tush with the spunk shad, then the hair jig, and then a big swim bait. Again, this is based on 2 years of fish catches from my YouTube videos. I didn't want to replicate the Big Bass Index analysis because I didn't have enough sample and I also didn't have all the usage data readily available. So I basically just focused on the total number of fish catches on these baits. But what's interesting is that, as you can see here, we don't have any jigs, any crankbaits, or any big worms listed on this list. Now, part of that is because I did remove some fish catches where I didn't actually need forward-facing sonar to catch them, where I was basically just throwing at waypoints. But there were some fish catches on all 3 of those baits, the big worm, deep diving crankbait, and jig. I just haven't really been throwing them all that much because I've been focused on throwing these kind of minnow imitators that were targeting those suspended fish. I've become pretty proficient with it, and as you can see, I'm catching quite a few fish in my forward-facing trips with these baits, and these were basically the main baits I was throwing in those trips. But my average size is just a little bit lower than when I went back to my traditional routes of throwing the jigs and the crankbaits, which I am very proficient at using. This kind of leads me to 2 potential paths going forward if I'm going to use forward-facing sonar. I don't know if I'm actually going to use forward-facing sonar that much in videos going forward, maybe here or there. I actually really enjoyed not using it, so that's actually one finding from this entire experience or experiment. I like catching fish without forward-facing sonar. I find it very enjoyable. It's a little more challenging. I have to graph a lot more, but when I do find them, I get a bigger sense of achievement when I actually catch them because I don't know I'm going to catch them. I am not chasing around individual fish. I'm finding schools. It's just kind of how I grew up fishing and it's what I enjoy. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about doing in the majority of my videos. But if I do fish with forward-facing sonar going forward, I kind of see 2 different paths I could follow. Path 1 is to try to integrate the baits that I'm very proficient with my forward-facing sonar strategy. So basically going out to the lake and trying to find ways to catch fish on a deep diving crankbait, a jig, and a big worm, and optimizing for those baits using forward-facing sonar. The other option is basically to focus on using these same baits that I've had a lot of success with, but trying to narrow down the specific situations or areas or kind of strategies that I'm implementing to reduce the number of fish I'm catching, but try to increase the size of my fish. I still kind of have that tournament mentality in my head, and I still like to try to catch my 5 biggest fish possible. So if I was going to go out to the lake with forward-facing sonar, I would ideally like to maybe cut my number of fish catches in half from 21 to maybe 10 or 11, but increase my fish size by, let's say, a pound or even 1.5 pounds per fish, so I can get an average fish size of 2.5 to 3 pounds and my average weight maybe up to like 16 to 17 pounds. I think this is possible using a combination of, again, strategy of basically not focusing on throwing at every little fish and maybe also changing bait selection a little bit. I know one bait that a lot of guys are having a lot of success with right now with forward-facing sonar is a bigger flutter spoon, whether that is like a 5, 6, or even 8-inch flutter spoon. Another bait guys are catching bigger fish on is a glide bait. And as you can see, I haven't really been catching a lot of fish on either a big flutter spoon or a big glide bait, even though I know they are very effective now across the country in different seasons, different situations, lake types, things like that. There's a lot of guys in my area that are winning tournaments on those baits, and I just haven't really taken the time to focus on throwing them. And that could be another option. Basically, try to pick baits that over-index on size, bigger baits, and because I can see all the fish with the forward facing, I may be able to just focus and hone in on those individual bigger fish and target them. That doesn't sound that exciting to me, to be honest. I think that's what I could do, and that might be what you would want to do if you wanted to really dial in your forward-facing sonar game. As you heard earlier, what Justin Lucas said, he basically said that the top anglers in the world are committing 100% to that technology, and that's what's giving them the advantage over other competitors. I don't fish tournaments anymore. I still like to have that tournament mentality when I go to the lake. Because I don't fish tournaments, I don't feel this pressure or need to use forward-facing. I do think that there's still some room for making educational videos about it and making some basic forward-facing sonar content, or if I figure out like the glide bait or the flutter spoon deal, maybe making a video about that for those who are interested, because I do think that that's still valuable content. But again, I've been having a lot of fun without the forward-facing, so I'm still a little bit kind of on the fence there. Maybe let me know in the comments what you think I should do in my future videos. If you think a mix, or just say, just use regular traditional sonar, or go all in on forward facing. I'd love to hear your opinion down below. I'm probably just gonna do whatever I feel like is the best for me, but it's still great to get everyone's opinion. Hopefully this data was interesting to you guys though. Again, it's not a huge sample size. It's 4 fishing trips with and without. The time of year was a little bit different. It wasn't the exact same lake. So I'm not saying that this is the perfect analysis, but I think that some of the insights I gained were very helpful for me at least, and gave me a better idea of what I want to do with my fishing going forward. And I think that hopefully it will give you an idea if you're struggling with the same kind of dilemma of forward facing, no forward facing, or you just want to use one or the other. You can see how I kind of would go about it, the strategies and things I'd employ, and how I might approach it going forward. So again, if you enjoyed this video, leave a comment down below, and also leave a like, and subscribe to the Fish the Moment YouTube channel for more content like this.